She walked into the small room, carrying nothing but her worn bag and the quiet weight of expectation that no one had placed on her yet. The room was filled with people who had come to hear music, but not necessarily to watch her. Some were musicians, some were curious onlookers, and a few had come to kill time, expecting nothing more than background noise. The piano sat in the corner, polished and black, reflecting the dim light from the ceiling. Its presence seemed to command respect, though no one had yet given her any. When she approached, a few people smiled politely. One person, a man leaning against the wall with a notebook, chuckled softly and asked what she planned to play. Her answer was quiet, almost hesitant. "Just an easy tune," she said. It was the sort of statement that invited little attention. The words themselves seemed to say, "Don't expect much." Some eyebrows lifted, some faces relaxed into a bored curiosity, and a few heads nodded as if to say, "Sure, just another amateur trying to sound impressive." No one knew her story, and she had no intention of telling it yet. She had come here to play, not to explain herself. Her fingers brushed the keys lightly at first, testing the familiar surface that had comforted her through countless practice sessions. The first notes were soft, plain, unassuming. A few people leaned back, ready to glance at their phones or chat quietly. There was nothing yet to suggest that this would be more than a casual, forgettable performance. As she continued, the melody stayed simple. It was easy, just as she had promised. But there was a subtle intention behind every keystroke. Her eyes were calm, focused, looking not at the audience but at the keys themselves. Her posture was relaxed, yet there was a tension in her shoulders that spoke of years of preparation. Every movement had been practiced countless times, even for a tune that appeared so ordinary. People started to notice small differences, though. The way her fingers moved across the keys was precise. Each note held its place, even in moments that could have sounded careless. There was a rhythm to her playing that was natural but confident, something that could not be taught in a single lesson or learned quickly. A woman sitting near the piano tilted her head, curious. She whispered to the person next to her, asking if she had noticed the control and timing in the performance. The other person shrugged, but even in that shrug was a hint of doubt, a recognition that something subtle was happening. The atmosphere in the room began to shift, almost imperceptibly. The murmurs of conversation died down. The gentle tapping of fingers on phones stopped. People were beginning to pay attention, not because the music was flashy, but because there was a feeling beneath it, a quiet depth that drew them in. It was the kind of music that seemed simple on the surface but carried something more profound underneath. Even those who had come with little interest found themselves leaning forward, watching her hands, listening closely to each note. She did not rush. She did not pause for applause or approval. Her connection was with the piano, with the music itself, and through it, with anyone who was truly listening. There was no arrogance, no attempt to impress. Yet, there was a quiet authority in the way she played. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to the casual observer, but powerful to anyone who understood the care and skill behind it. As she played, memories flickered through her mind. She thought of the long nights spent practicing in small, empty rooms. She remembered moments of frustration, hitting wrong notes over and over, feeling as though progress would never come. She remembered the few people who had doubted her abilities, the ones who had told her that her dreams were too big or that she would never be good enough. And she remembered the rare encouragements, the small nods of support that had kept her going. All of that was in her hands now, expressed silently through the keys. The room began to feel warmer somehow, not physically but emotionally. The people who had come expecting to be polite witnesses to a simple tune found themselves drawn in. They were not applauding yet, they were not whispering praise, but they were listening. The energy shifted from casual amusement to quiet attention. Something was happening, though no one could yet define what it was. It was the beginning of a story that would unfold not in words, but in music. She glanced around briefly, seeing the mix of faces watching her. None were judgmental now. Some were curious, others surprised by the subtle mastery they could sense. She smiled faintly, not at them, but at the piano itself. It had been a long journey to reach this moment, and she felt the presence of all those hours of practice in every movement, every note. The tune was still easy, still familiar. Yet, something about the way she played it began to shift the perception of the audience. The notes carried emotion that had not been there at the start. They spoke of patience, resilience, and quiet strength. Some people found themselves holding their breath without realizing it, waiting for the next note, the next phrase, the next moment that would change the ordinary into something extraordinary. There was a rhythm to her hands, a grace that seemed effortless but was born from years of discipline. Her fingers danced lightly at first, but with increasing confidence. The melody began to breathe, to swell subtly, to move as if it had its own life. Even the most distracted spectators were now caught, compelled to follow the music with their ears and hearts. It was no longer just a simple tune. It was a reflection of every struggle, every triumph, every quiet moment of learning that had brought her here. As she continued, she became aware of the faint sounds of shifting chairs and soft gasps. People were leaning forward, some whispering to their companions in disbelief. They had expected something small, nothing remarkable, but what they were experiencing was different. There was a tension building, a sense of anticipation, even though the notes were still soft and the tune familiar. It was the feeling that something bigger was coming, that this simple start was leading to a moment they would not forget. Her focus never wavered. She did not look for approval or applause. Her eyes remained on the piano, her mind on the music. Every note was intentional, every pause measured. She had learned that music was not just about sound. It was about connection. The piano was an extension of herself, and through it, she spoke to anyone who chose to listen. The room was still quiet, but now it was a quiet filled with attention, with anticipation, with respect that had grown without words. Even in these first moments, the audience could sense that this performance was unusual. The simplicity of the tune created a contrast with the subtle skill she displayed. It was easy to underestimate her, to assume that the music would remain ordinary. But in the way her fingers moved, in the slight variations of timing and pressure, there was an unmistakable signal that this was no ordinary player. Something was simmering beneath the surface, something that would soon make the audience see the piano and her hands in a new light. As the last notes of the first segment lingered, she allowed a brief pause, a moment for the sound to settle in the room. There was no applause yet, only the hushed recognition that something unexpected had begun. Eyes met hers briefly, not in judgment, but in curiosity and wonder. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the piano, acknowledging its role in the performance, then resumed. The tune continued, easy, familiar, yet now charged with quiet promise. The crowd was ready, even if they did not know it yet, for what was about to unfold. In that room, with the soft lighting and the attentive audience, something delicate and powerful began to grow. It was the start of a journey that would take the ordinary and transform it, note by note, into something unforgettable. And it all began with a simple, unassuming request for an easy tune. The music continued, flowing gently at first, with the simplicity of the tune comforting the audience. Many people relaxed back in their chairs, thinking they had judged correctly, that this would remain a pleasant but ordinary performance. Yet, there was a subtle difference in how she played. Each note was intentional, each pause measured, creating a rhythm that invited listeners to pay attention. It was quiet, almost invisible at first, but the audience began to sense it, like the slow stir of wind before a storm. Her hands moved gracefully over the keys, fingers lightly tapping, then pressing firmly when needed. The room was still calm, but an invisible tension built. Some people shifted in their seats, curiosity replacing boredom. One person leaned closer, noticing the slight variations in timing, the way the notes lingered just a fraction longer than expected. Another whispered, almost to themselves, questioning how a simple tune could sound so controlled, so alive. She did not look at them. Her eyes stayed on the piano, scanning the keys with quiet focus. Each movement was deliberate. Every sound she produced had been practiced countless times in empty rooms, under dim lights, when no one was there to witness the effort. That effort, unseen and unremarkable to most, was now beginning to show. Even though the melody was familiar and easy, it carried something more: experience, patience, and dedication that could not be faked. The audience began to notice small details that made them pause. The soft lift of a hand between notes, the smooth transition from one chord to another, the way her fingers lingered slightly to emphasize emotion. It was subtle, but it was enough. People were no longer just hearing music. They were feeling it. The casual chatter had stopped entirely. Phones were put down. Eyes followed her hands as if trying to understand the quiet magic unfolding. She remembered the early days of her training, the long hours spent practicing scales, the frustration of hitting wrong keys over and over. She thought of the people who doubted her, who said she would never be capable of more than ordinary performances. She thought of those rare moments when someone had recognized her talent, even slightly, giving her hope to continue. All those moments, both discouraging and uplifting, were now reflected in her touch on the piano, in the depth and care of each note. At first, her playing was calm and predictable, just as she had promised with her words, just an easy tune. But gradually, there was a subtle shift. She began to explore the spaces between notes, adding a depth of feeling that was unspoken yet understood. The simple tune took on a life of its own, as if it were more than music, as if it were a story being told silently, intimately. People who had thought they would watch something forgettable now felt compelled to listen, drawn into the unfolding performance. Some in the audience began to exchange glances. One woman tilted her head, intrigued, whispering softly to the person beside her, trying to articulate what they were sensing. Another man frowned, confused by the change in atmosphere. What had begun as a casual tune was now growing into something more, something that stirred curiosity and quiet excitement. Even those who initially paid little attention now found themselves leaning forward, drawn to the energy in the room, even if they did not yet fully understand it. She remained unaware of the crowd's reaction. Her mind was entirely with the music, with the flow of notes, the rise and fall of the melody. Every chord she struck carried a piece of herself. Years of quiet work, moments of doubt, tiny victories won in private practice rooms. She was telling a story without words, a story that required no introduction or explanation, only patience and attentiveness to hear and feel. As the tune progressed, there were moments when she paused slightly, allowing the sound to resonate in the room. Those pauses were not empty. They were filled with tension, anticipation, a kind of silent invitation to the listeners. People leaned in without thinking, caught in the quiet drama unfolding in front of them. The melody, though still simple, now held a presence that was undeniable. Each note seemed to hover in the air, lingering longer than expected, creating a connection between the music and the hearts of the audience. The room, once casual and indifferent, was now charged with subtle energy. Conversations had stopped completely. Even people who were normally restless, who shifted in their seats or whispered to companions, were now fixed, absorbed by the performance. They could sense that something special was happening, though they could not yet define it. The music seemed to carry more than sound. It carried feeling, intent, and a quiet strength that demanded attention. Her hands glided effortlessly, though every movement was the result of discipline and precision. There was no rush, no unnecessary flourish. Yet the power in her touch was apparent. The soft, almost delicate notes were just as commanding as the stronger chords, because each was executed with care and intention. The audience began to understand, in small increments, that the woman at the piano was not ordinary. There was mastery in her restraint, confidence in her calm, and emotion that could not be taught. For a moment, a slight tremor in the notes caught the ear of one listener. It was so brief that many would have missed it, but it added to the human quality of the performance. It reminded everyone that this was not a mechanical demonstration, but a real person connecting deeply with the music. That tiny imperfection, blended seamlessly into the melody, made the audience feel closer, as if they were witnessing something authentic and personal. As the tune moved along, her control over the dynamics, the soft and loud, the pause and the flow became more evident. She was shaping the sound like a sculptor shaping clay, molding an emotion from the air, creating a subtle narrative that unfolded without words. The audience began to feel the story behind the notes, sensing the dedication, the countless hours of quiet effort, and the moments of self-doubt that had led her to this place. One by one, people began to realize that this was not just background music. It was a performance, not meant to impress superficially but to connect, to communicate something essential and human. The quiet room seemed alive now, energized by the shared experience of listening. Even the skeptical faces softened, curiosity and admiration replacing their initial indifference. They were witnessing something real, a glimpse into the life of someone who had given everything to her craft without expectation or demand. She continued to play, letting the tune evolve naturally. There were small variations now, subtle improvisations that added color and depth without breaking the simplicity of the melody. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. The audience could sense the story hidden beneath the familiar tune, the emotions shaped by years of practice and perseverance. They leaned forward instinctively, some closing their eyes briefly to better feel the music. The room was silent except for the piano, and the silence itself carried weight. It was not awkward or tense but expectant, as if everyone collectively held their breath, waiting for the next moment, the next phrase that would deepen the effect. The energy was quiet but intense, a shared understanding that something extraordinary was unfolding right before their eyes. She did not rush to fill the room with sound. She allowed the quiet spaces between notes to speak, to create emotion without overwhelming the listener. Those spaces became as important as the notes themselves, giving the audience time to absorb, reflect, and feel. The music became a dialogue, unspoken, between her and everyone present, connecting through the subtle power of sound and silence. Some people shifted slightly, visibly moved, while others remained frozen, caught by the quiet authority of the performance. None were bored now, none dismissive. Each listener felt the weight and the beauty of what was happening, realizing that what had begun as a simple, easy tune was becoming something richer, more profound, more human than anyone had anticipated. She played on, not seeking applause or recognition, not aiming to dazzle. Her focus was entirely on the piano and the story she was telling through it. Every movement, every note, every pause reflected her journey. The hard work, the quiet persistence, the struggles that had shaped her into the musician she was. The audience could feel that journey even if they did not know the details. They sensed the care, the depth, the authenticity behind each sound. By the time she reached the end of the tune, the mood in the room had transformed completely. What had begun as polite curiosity, with polite smiles and mild amusement, had grown into quiet admiration and focused attention. People sat with their eyes on her hands, their hearts quietly touched by the subtle power of her music. They did not yet know what was coming next, but they were ready to listen, ready to witness the full unfolding of her talent. The simple tune, which seemed ordinary at first, had begun to reveal the extraordinary skill, emotion, and humanity behind it as she continued to play. The music began to change in ways that no one in the room had expected. The tune, which had started as simple and comforting, slowly grew richer, deeper, and more expressive. At first, the shift was subtle. A note held slightly longer, a pause became more pronounced, a chord resonated more fully than before. Listeners who had been casually engaged now leaned in, sensing that the ordinary was giving way to something extraordinary. Her hands moved faster now, yet they remained controlled. Every note landed precisely where it should. Every phrase flowed naturally. The audience felt a new energy in the room, something that was both thrilling and almost impossible to ignore. Even the skeptics, those who had arrived expecting a simple performance, found themselves caught in the moment, their eyes widening as they watched her fingers dance across the keys. She did not glance at the audience. Her eyes stayed fixed on the piano, and yet she was aware of the change in the room. The air felt charged, filled with a quiet excitement that made the small space seem larger, more alive. The music itself seemed to grow in confidence, expanding beyond the original tune and embracing a freedom that was as mesmerizing as it was unexpected. People whispered softly to each other, trying to understand what was happening. They were seeing a transformation unfold before them. The simple melody they had expected had been only a beginning. Now it was evolving into something far more complex, more powerful, more emotionally engaging. The first few bars had lulled them into thinking this was ordinary, but now they realized they had underestimated the musician completely. Her hands flew across the keys, yet she never lost control. The music was no longer just notes and rhythm. It was a living expression of emotion. Each chord seemed to tell a story. Each phrase conveyed a feeling that words could not capture. Some in the audience felt their own hearts rise and fall with the tempo, swept up in the subtle drama she was creating. They were silent, yet completely absorbed, caught in the intimacy of the performance. She remembered moments from her past. The long hours of practice, the frustration of repeated mistakes, the quiet determination that had driven her to keep going when no one was watching. That effort, invisible to the world, was now being expressed through her hands, through the piano, reaching every person in the room. There was a quiet triumph in that realization, a satisfaction that could not be measured in applause or recognition. She played for the music, for herself, and in doing so, she was sharing the essence of her journey with anyone willing to listen. The melody began to twist and turn, exploring unexpected harmonies and rhythms. It was no longer a simple tune. It had become a tapestry of sound, each note weaving into the next with elegance and precision. The audience felt the tension rise and fall, a natural ebb and flow that mirrored the unspoken emotions behind the performance. Some closed their eyes, letting the music fill them completely, while others watched in awe as her hands seemed to move with a life of their own. She allowed herself a moment to feel the music fully, letting the emotion guide her fingers. The tune, once predictable, became unpredictable and alive. There was a sense of freedom in the way she played, a refusal to be confined by expectation or simplicity. Each note carried intention and feeling, and the audience could sense that every movement, every pause, every chord had been shaped by her experience, her patience, and her love for the instrument. The room was completely silent now, except for the music itself. It was as if time had slowed, allowing everyone to focus on the unfolding transformation. People who had been doubtful or indifferent were now captivated. Their eyes were fixed, their minds alert, and their hearts subtly moved by the unexpected depth of the performance. Even those who were usually critical or unimpressed could not ignore the skill, passion, and control on display. She began to push the boundaries of the tune, experimenting with dynamics, tempo, and expression. What had started as a straightforward melody now grew into a complex interplay of sound and emotion. The audience could feel the tension building, the music rising and falling with dramatic effect. There was a sense that they were witnessing a revelation, a hidden truth emerging from simplicity, a story being told not with words, but with movement, sound, and feeling. Her hands blurred across the keys, yet each note was perfectly measured. The piano seemed to respond to her touch, vibrating with resonance, filling the room with sound that was both powerful and intimate. It was no longer background music. It was the focal point of the entire space, commanding attention and stirring emotion in everyone present. Some felt goosebumps along their arms, some felt their chests tighten, others felt tears form, though they dared not move or speak. The transformation of the tune became more pronounced. Moments of quiet subtlety alternated with bursts of energetic complexity. The music told a story that was both personal and universal. It spoke of struggle and triumph, of patience and perseverance, of quiet strength revealed under pressure. The audience could feel it in the air, in the vibration of the piano, in the intensity of her focus. They were no longer passive listeners. They were participants in the unfolding narrative, drawn into a shared experience that transcended words. She did not rush to finish. There was no urgency, no concern for time or recognition. Each note, each phrase was deliberate and measured, designed to convey the depth of feeling behind it. The audience could sense the care, the precision, and the emotion behind every keystroke. What had begun as a simple tune was now a performance of mastery, skill, and heart. Every listener felt the presence of someone who had dedicated their life to their craft, and they were witnessing it fully, in real time. The music rose to a crescendo, powerful but controlled. Her hands moved with speed and accuracy, creating layers of sound that seemed to fill the room and go beyond it. Listeners felt the intensity. Their own emotions stirred in response. It was as if the piano itself had been transformed, ignited by her touch, resonating with life and energy. The once simple tune had become an expression of passion, skill, and resilience, leaving the audience in awe. People leaned forward instinctively, unable to look away. Their eyes followed her every movement. Their ears caught every subtle change in tone and timing. They were witnessing a turning point, a moment where expectation was shattered and replaced by astonishment. The audience could feel the history behind the performance. The years of dedication, the quiet struggles, the unspoken determination. It was a living demonstration of what commitment and passion could produce. Her fingers continued to move with precision and grace, each note a statement of control and emotion. She allowed the music to breathe, to rise and fall naturally, creating a rhythm that was both exhilarating and soothing. The simple tune had grown into a narrative, each phrase a sentence, each chord a paragraph, building toward a climax that promised to leave a lasting impression on everyone listening. The audience remained silent, held captive by the unfolding performance. They felt the tension and release, the subtle shifts in tone and tempo, the careful balance of control and expression. It was as if the piano had become a voice for something larger, something human, something deeply felt. The turning point of the tune was evident now. What had started as an ordinary melody had revealed the extraordinary skill and emotion hidden within her hands. Even as she played with increasing complexity, there was a sense of inevitability. Every movement was deliberate, every choice intentional, yet the flow remained natural and fluid. The audience felt the connection between her and the piano, a bond that transcended the room and reached into their own emotions. They were no longer simply watching a performance. They were experiencing a transformation, caught in the moment when simplicity became brilliance. As the music continued, the audience could sense that this was only the beginning. The turning point had arrived, the moment when expectation gave way to revelation. The simple tune was now alive, rich with meaning, infused with the essence of the performer's journey. Each note carried weight, each pause created tension, and the room itself seemed to pulse with the energy she produced. People who had initially smiled politely or shrugged with disinterest were now fully engaged. They were silent witnesses to something remarkable, feeling the depth and emotion of every note. Their minds tried to process what they were hearing, but words failed them. All they could do was listen, watch, and feel. The transformation of the tune had created a shared experience, a moment that everyone would carry with them long after the last note had faded. She played on, aware only of the music and the story it told. The turning point had shifted the performance into a realm where technical skill, emotion, and human experience intertwined. The audience felt the power of her touch, the subtle mastery of her hands, and the depth of feeling behind every keystroke. The piano was no longer an instrument. It was an extension of her, and through it, she communicated with every person present. The tune had transformed completely. What had begun as an easy, simple melody was now a complex, expressive performance, a reflection of years of dedication, resilience, and quiet passion. The audience could not look away, could not ignore the subtle brilliance unfolding before them. The room had changed. It was no longer just a space for music. It had become a place of shared emotion, of connection, of awe. They were witnessing something rare, something unforgettable, and it all started with a simple request for an easy tune. The music had grown beyond a simple tune now. It filled the room in a way that was almost tangible, vibrating through the air and settling into the hearts of everyone present. Her hands moved across the keys with precision and speed, yet there was grace in every gesture. The audience could feel it, a kind of energy that seemed to ignite the space around them, pulling them into the story that was unfolding note by note. At first, the change was subtle, a lift in tempo here, a flourish there. Then, without warning, the performance soared. The easy melody she had promised became an intricate dance of sound, a cascade of emotion and technical skill that left the listeners speechless. Some leaned forward instinctively, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, unable to look away. Others closed their eyes, letting the music carry them, their hearts moving with every chord. Her fingers flew across the piano, not in a rush but in controlled determination. Every note was intentional, every pause deliberate. The audience could feel the presence of her countless hours of practice, the dedication, the silent struggle that had honed her ability. It was not just performance. It was an expression of everything she had poured into music over the years. Each keystroke told a story, and those who listened closely could feel the weight of her journey. The melody grew louder, more powerful, yet still maintained an elegance that was breathtaking. The audience had expected simplicity, a tune that would pass without remark. What they were experiencing was something else entirely. The room was alive with sound, energy, and emotion, and it was impossible to separate the music from the performer. She had become one with the piano, and the piano had become one with her. People's reactions began to shift. Those who had come to watch casually were now captivated, unable to look away. Some held their breath as her hands moved so quickly and precisely that it almost seemed unreal. Others felt a strange stirring in their chests, a combination of awe, excitement, and the unspoken recognition of brilliance in front of them. The simple request for an easy tune had become an unforgettable experience. Her eyes never left the keys, yet she sensed the shift in the audience. There was a quiet electricity in the room, a collective energy that seemed to respond to her music. It was as if the piano itself had been set alight, not with literal fire but with passion and intensity. The notes seemed to leap off the keys, filling the space, touching every corner of the room, and reaching deep into the hearts of those who listened. She had reached the point in the performance where skill, emotion, and experience collided. Her hands were a blur, dancing over the black and white keys, producing a sound that was simultaneously controlled and wild, precise yet overflowing with feeling. The room had gone completely silent, not from fear or tension, but from total absorption. Every listener was caught in the moment, captivated by the energy she was creating. Her body moved with the music, leaning slightly forward, swaying in rhythm with her own performance. There was no showmanship, no attempt to draw attention through gestures. The focus was entirely on the music, and through that, on the shared experience of everyone present. The notes she played seemed to resonate beyond the piano, touching the listeners in ways words could not describe. Some felt tears prick their eyes, others felt a surge of excitement that made their hearts race. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a living, breathing extension of her emotion. As the melody reached new heights, she introduced subtle variations and unexpected harmonies. Each note added complexity and depth, and yet the entire performance remained cohesive, balanced, and intentional. The audience could sense the mastery behind every movement, the countless hours of dedication that had culminated in this moment. It was as if the piano itself had become a storyteller, narrating a tale of struggle, patience, resilience, and triumph. The crescendo of the performance drew the listeners in even more. The music surged like a wave, rising and falling, carrying emotion that was almost physical. Some audience members felt their hearts beat faster. Others felt a strange warmth spread through their chest. There was an intensity in the air, a kind of shared energy that seemed to bind the room together. The simple tune had transformed into a performance that was breathtaking in its scale, beauty, and emotional impact. Her hands seemed to move faster than was possible, yet each note landed perfectly, creating harmony, tension, and release. The piano sounded alive, as if responding to her touch, singing with her spirit, expressing emotions that went beyond technique. The audience could feel the power of her connection to the instrument, and in doing so, they felt the emotion too. The room was completely absorbed in the music, and everyone present was part of the unfolding moment. The tune, once easy and unremarkable, had become a force. It carried urgency, passion, and grace, capturing attention completely. The audience was spellbound, caught in the delicate balance of intensity and control. Her hands continued their dance over the keys, faster and more intricate than before, yet every movement was clear and purposeful. The music built like a fire, spreading warmth and energy, igniting emotions and filling the space with uncontainable energy. Some people held their hands over their hearts, some clasped their hands tightly, overwhelmed by the beauty of what they were witnessing. The performance was no longer about a simple tune. It was about connection, about human emotion, about the unspoken power of dedication and talent. The piano had become a conduit, carrying her journey and her passion to each listener, allowing them to feel what she had felt in years of practice and perseverance. As the music reached its peak, there was a moment when the room seemed to vibrate with sound. Her hands moved with breathtaking speed, yet with total control. Every chord, every note, every variation was intentional and precise. The audience could feel the intensity, the excitement, the brilliance of the moment. The piano, under her hands, seemed to catch fire metaphorically, alive with energy, emotion, and skill. The performance was both explosive and refined, a balance of raw power and delicate beauty. The audience was completely absorbed, silent but electrified, hearts racing and eyes wide. Each person felt a connection not only to the music but to the performer herself, sensing the dedication, the struggle, and the triumph that had brought her to this point. They understood, without words, that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Her movements were fluid, natural, and unstoppable. The music flowed through her, from her hands into the piano, and into the room, touching everyone who listened. Some could feel chills, others tears, and some simply sat in awe, unable to look away. There was a shared experience, a unity created by the power and emotion of the music, something that transcended explanation or expectation. As the piece reached its climax, she played with a combination of technical brilliance and deep emotional resonance. Every note carried meaning, every pause created tension, every flourish added beauty. The audience could feel the culmination of years of dedication, practice, and quiet perseverance. They were witnessing not just a performance but a revelation, a moment where music became more than sound and became something profoundly human. The room seemed to hold its breath as she finished the last notes. They lingered in the air, resonating with intensity and emotion. For a moment, there was silence, an almost sacred pause where the audience could reflect on what they had experienced. The music had taken them on a journey, transforming a simple, easy tune into an unforgettable performance, leaving them changed, touched, and inspired. When the final note faded, there was a brief moment of disbelief, as if no one could comprehend fully what had just happened. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, soft at first, then swelling into a wave of appreciation. People rose from their seats, some cheering, some clapping quietly, all moved by the extraordinary display of skill, passion, and emotion. The piano had been set ablaze in a way that was impossible to ignore, and everyone present knew they had witnessed something remarkable. The final note lingered in the air, a delicate vibration that slowly faded into silence. For a moment, the room held its breath, the audience frozen, trying to process the experience they had just shared. The music had taken them on a journey, starting from a simple, unassuming tune and building into something so powerful, so moving, that it left them in awe. Their applause began slowly, almost tentatively, as if they were testing whether what they had heard was real. Then it grew, swelling into a wave of appreciation that filled the room completely. People were on their feet now, clapping, cheering, some even whistling, caught up in the energy of the moment. Faces glowed with excitement, others were tearful, touched in ways they could not fully explain. The quiet room had transformed into a space of celebration, of shared admiration for someone who had taken something ordinary and turned it into something unforgettable. They had come expecting a simple performance, but what they witnessed was extraordinary. She remained at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. She did not move immediately, allowing the applause to wash over her, soaking in the energy without seeking it. She had played for herself, for the music, and yet the recognition, the collective reaction of the audience, was a warm acknowledgement of her journey and dedication. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not from applause, but from the knowledge that the music had reached them, had touched them, had moved them. People began to approach her cautiously, some with questions, others with words of admiration. They asked how long she had been playing, where she had learned, how she had achieved such skill and emotional depth. She answered quietly, humbly, sharing only what felt necessary, never boasting. Her focus had never been on recognition or praise, yet now it came naturally, offered freely by those who had witnessed her performance. The audience understood, perhaps instinctively, that they had been in the presence of someone exceptional. The energy in the room was contagious. Conversations buzzed with excitement. Whispers of astonishment spread from group to group. People recounted the way her hands had moved, the way the simple tune had grown into something magnificent, the emotions it had stirred within them. Even those who had arrived indifferent or skeptical found themselves caught in the story, sharing experiences and interpretations with those around them. The music had created a shared connection, a bond between performer and audience that lingered long after the last note had sounded. She reflected quietly on what had just happened. The performance was a culmination of years of practice, discipline, and perseverance. Each struggle, each late night spent perfecting scales, each moment of doubt or frustration, had contributed to this single moment of connection. It was a reminder that true skill and artistry often hide behind humility and simplicity. The easy tune had been the perfect canvas for everything she had learned and experienced. It allowed her to reveal the depth of her ability without seeking attention, to express emotion without pretense. Some audience members approached her with more personal questions, curious about her journey. They wanted to know what had driven her, how she had persevered through challenges, how she had cultivated such mastery of the instrument. She shared some small pieces of her story, the hours of quiet work, the moments when she had doubted herself, and the few encouraging voices that had kept her going. People listened, captivated not just by her words, but by the sincerity and humility that accompanied them. They realized that her performance was not just a display of talent, but a testament to patience, resilience, and devotion. The room gradually settled into a quieter state as people continued to discuss what they had experienced. Many returned to their seats, replaying the performance in their minds, remembering the moments when the music had lifted them, surprised them, or moved them deeply. They spoke softly, hesitant to break the memory entirely, savoring the lingering echoes of the piano and the emotion it had carried. It was clear that this was not a fleeting impression. The impact would remain long after they left the room. She stood slowly, moving away from the piano with grace and composure. People watched, their eyes filled with respect and admiration. There was no need for fanfare or celebration beyond the applause. The performance had spoken for itself. She had allowed the music to carry the story, and the audience had received it fully. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her effort, her dedication, and her honesty had been recognized in the purest form possible, through the hearts of those who had listened. Some lingered near the piano, touching the keys, trying to imagine the skill and emotion that had produced the music they had just heard. Others spoke quietly about the intensity of the performance, the moment when the simple tune had grown into something powerful, the way it had captured their attention and refused to let go. The room was alive with reflection and admiration, the atmosphere still charged with the energy of the experience. Everyone shared a collective understanding that they had witnessed something special, rare, and deeply human. She gathered her bag and prepared to leave, moving slowly through the crowd that had begun to disperse. People approached her to offer thanks, compliments, or simple acknowledgement. She responded with quiet grace, nodding, smiling softly, and occasionally speaking a few words of thanks or encouragement. She did not seek to extend the moment unnecessarily, Yet each interaction was meaningful, reinforcing the connection created by the music. The performance had been about more than technique. It had been about sharing emotion, creating understanding, and touching the hearts of those present. As she exited the room, the atmosphere remained warm and reflective. People returned to their daily lives carrying the memory of what they had witnessed. Some replayed the music in their minds, savoring the way it had moved them. Others felt inspired, reminded of the power of dedication, focus, and authenticity. The performance had left a mark that was subtle yet lasting, a reminder that true artistry often reveals itself in unexpected ways. In the quiet after the performance, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The hours of practice, the moments of doubt, the tiny victories, and the occasional encouragements all contributed to the music she had shared. She knew that her performance had been honest, unpretentious, and human, and that it had reached the audience in a way that words could never fully capture. The simple tune had been transformed, and in doing so, it had transformed the room and the people who had listened. Her heart was calm, yet filled with satisfaction. She understood that the impact of the performance extended beyond applause or recognition. It was in the connection created, the emotions shared, the unspoken understanding between performer and audience. She had played not for fame or reward, but for the love of music and the desire to communicate, to express, and to connect. That connection, she knew, was the true measure of success. As the room emptied and the echoes of the piano faded, the memory of the performance lingered. The audience would carry it with them, recalling the transformation from a simple tune to a deeply moving experience. They would remember the way her hands moved, the way the music seemed to breathe, and the intensity of the moment when the piano had felt alive. The performance had become more than sound. It had become an experience, a shared human moment that transcended expectation. She stepped outside, taking a deep breath of fresh air. The evening sky was calm, yet inside her, there was a quiet energy, a satisfaction that came from knowing she had given everything to the music and that it had been received fully. The audience had smiled, applauded, and been moved, but more importantly, they had witnessed authenticity and dedication. The simple request for an easy tune had become a journey, a revelation, and a memory that would last far longer than the music itself. Walking away from the piano, she reflected on what had happened. The performance was a reminder that talent and dedication often hide behind simplicity, that the most profound experiences can begin quietly, unnoticed, and unfold only when given the opportunity. The easy tune had been a canvas, and through it, she had shared her story, her journey, and her heart with everyone who listened. It was a moment of connection, of human expression, and of artistry that left a lasting impression on all who were present. As the room emptied completely, the piano remained, silent yet resonant, a witness to the extraordinary moment it had been part of. The notes had faded, but the impact remained. Every person who had heard the performance would carry it with them, remembering the transformation, the energy, and the emotion. They would recall the simple tune, the way it had begun, and how it had grown into something unforgettable. The experience had been real, human, and deeply moving. The story of that performance would be told quietly among those who had witnessed it. They would recount the way the music had started simply, the way the audience had shifted from casual observers to captivated listeners, and the way the piano had seemed alive under her hands. It was a reminder that true artistry does not always demand attention but often reveals itself in the quietest, most unassuming moments. The impact of that night would linger, a testament to the power of dedication, emotion, and the human connection that music can create.